Hey guys, welcome to the first video of the channel. We've got a super important topic that we're going to be talking about today. Climate change, guys. Huge issue that's coming up for a lot of us in this generation. Potentially, if you believe in the science. And we're going to be talking about a couple of people who have kind of claimed that they don't necessarily believe in the science recently, potentially, or they have enough disagreements with the climate change agenda that it's kind of putting a damper on the entire climate change movement. So we got Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson. If you guys saw the title of the video, saw kind of what we'll be talking about today, then you've got a clue on things. So the way I'm going to be doing this is just kind of going with the guideline that I have behind me here and just running through these topics. So talk about how they approach this topic and offer some critiques. So this is the main problem I have in the way we'll be able to kind of break down what's wrong with how they approach this argument. And we could do this in a way that is non-scientific, that's really consumable for everybody. We could do that. That's their arguments are framed in a way where we can break them down without getting too into the weeds on things. I'm going to go over some science stuff for you guys to take a look at if you want to, but I don't think it'll be necessary to break down the flaws in their argument. I will be explaining these critiques from a perspective of non-expert. I don't think it needs to be approached from an expert perspective to critique these guys' opinions. I'm going to go into it a little bit further, but this is coming from a non-expert myself, critiquing two other non-experts in Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson on this climate change debate. What's at stake? If we are to believe what the climate scientists are saying, what's at stake is food security. What's at stake is people's lives. What's at stake is our children's future. So there's a lot at stake, and that's why you see someone like me coming out of the woodwork to have a conversation about this. And who am I? I can go into more of that on a different video, but this video just keeps getting too long every time I make it. This is my third attempt, so I just want to get through the information. I'll probably create another video. So let's give an opinion on Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson here. I am a fan of both of these guys, big fan of Jordan Peterson, both really smart guys that I am a fan of. But are smart people always right, guys? I'm sure you've met some smart people in your life. That doesn't mean just because they're smart guys that we need to hang on every word that they're saying and we need to listen to everything that they're saying and everything that they're saying is true. We have smart people on both sides of this debate. We have smart scientists saying that climate change, anthropogenic climate change, is an issue. It's an issue that we have to pay attention to. So, just because they're smart guys, that's not enough. And I know there's some people out there that really admire these guys. I myself really admire particularly Jordan, Peterson's, some of his works. I think his personality series on YouTube 2017 was really awesome. I know some people disagree with plenty of both these guys' opinions. I have plenty of things I disagree with their opinions too on. So let's get into what these guys are experts of, and this is kind of what I alluded to before. Are either of these guys knowledgeable in climate science? Are they knowledgeable in science at all enough where they can speak on this topic? We have Joe Rogan, what is he experienced in, guys? He's experienced in combat sports. He's experienced in being a media personality. He's experienced in jujitsu, podcasting, these things. He's talked to a bunch of really smart people. He can recite a lot of different information, and I think this is one of Joe Rogan's biggest skills. But the problem with what I think with Joe Rogan and how it seems like he goes through this information is he gathers information and then he's able to recite it because he's got a great memory. But is that really good enough here? Is he taking all the little bits of information that he's getting from different pieces and different parties and figuring out how they fit into place and to create a whole picture of his opinion. I'm not sure he's doing that, or is he just moving from one expert's opinion to the next expert's opinion to the next expert's opinion on, or perceived expert's opinion? That is what I see from Joe Rogan, in my opinion. And not to, grill him too hard or anything. That's just on this topic in particular, especially. Jordan Peterson, rather. He's a psychologist. So that's what his field of study is in. So we have Joe Rogan with the combat sports, and we have Jordan Peterson with psychology. That's what they're experts in. They are not experts in climate science. Unless they present some sort of degree otherwise, then that this is what they're knowledgeable in. So, to think that they can just blasé speak about this topic the way that they do, when we talked about what's at stake earlier. We've got people's lives at stake. We've got food security at stake. We've got our children's lives at stake. I think they need to be more cautious with how they approach this discussion. So let's dig into what these guys' arguments are against the whole climate change agenda, and the anthropogenic climate change theory. So I've heard the first thing that they bring up is an increase in, well, not the first thing I will bring up that I've heard them say, an increase in greening. To me, I don't even necessarily know exactly what they mean by that. That can mean a variety of different things. And I'm pretty sure that's how they phrase it, an increase in greening. We're going to just assume they mean an increase in vegetation, meaning an increase in, plants who can uptake CO2 and release oxygen. That's what we're going to assume they mean by that. And okay, fair enough. What does that say about the amount of CO2 we're putting into the atmosphere? I don't know. And that's kind of the question that we're asking, right? What does that say about the greenhouse gas effect? I don't know. We do know plants uptake CO2 and release oxygen. Okay, I mean, fine. That's not addressing the question, right? It's not addressing anything about climate change. Climate scientists have previously warned about an ice age and now are warning about global warming. There's some validity to this. Now, this we're going to dip into the science a little bit, try to dip into my old knowledge about this. So scientists were previously warning about an ice age, and from my understanding, we were actually supposed to enter into an ice age. The reason that didn't happen, from what the experts say, is because of anthropogenic climate change and global warming. And now the reason why we were supposed to enter into an ice age is something called Milankovitch cycles. You guys know the Earth has entered and exited ice ages and non-ice ages in its geological time span. From my understanding, one of the largest drivers of this is Milankovitch cycles. So if you guys want to, go ahead and look into Milankovitch cycles. Apparently, we were supposed to enter into an ice age due to the shifting of Milankovitch cycles sometime in the 90s, I believe. I'm sorry, in the 1900s, not the 90s. So yeah, look more into that, guys. I mean, if that's valid, then that's a refute of their point right there. But they do have this point of people have always historically been alarmists about various different things. But we're going to bring up times where having that environmental alarmism has been a good thing in the past, so I don't see why it can't be a good thing here. And then finally, Jordan Peterson really likes to talk about how there's too many parameters for the modeling for climate change, and I just find this to be a ridiculous argument. You could say this about anything. I mean, so in psychology, I'm sure they're doing models on, predicting human behavior. You could say that about those models as well. I mean, if we're predicting the climate, if we're predicting human behavior, you have to, predict all sorts of other events too. Because what they're saying when they're saying there's too many parameters for these models is, we've got the sun that we can't really fully model and predict. We've got meteors, or we've got volcanoes, and we've got all of these various factors that have these huge impacts on climate that we can't really model for some of those things effectively. So we have to model with what we have available to us. Is that to say that those models are inaccurate? I mean, they've been pretty accurate so far in modeling the increase in temperature, from my understanding. So, I mean, we should look at the evidence of if the models have been trending in the direction that they say they have been, and they appear to be trending in that way. So, I mean, it's just an insane take, especially from Jordan Peterson, coming from a psychological background. He won't even deny that in psychology, their predictive modeling is absolutely horrible. So to then come into this world and then try to make that claim about the environmental science modeling, I don't know. It's a little crazy to me. You could say that about any model. I think that you have to look at all of the various factors. Okay, you could say that about any model. I just don't think that's good enough, guys. And do you guys think this is good enough for the framing of this argument? Do you think this is acceptable? Let's look at how the experts are talking about this, right? Because we established that none of us here are experts. I'm not an expert. Jordan Peterson's not an expert, and Joe Rogan's not an expert on this. So let's talk about how the experts approach this conversation. Are they approaching it about greening? Are they approaching it about these other various factors that these media personalities are bringing up? No, they're approaching it about CO2 levels, the parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. They're approaching it from the greenhouse gas effect. What does that do in our atmosphere? That's how they're approaching this, guys. And what is y'all's opinion? Do you think this is how we should be approaching it? The actual direct burning of fossil fuels and tracking of the carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, and figuring out exactly how that process works with our climate in the greenhouse gas effect. Is that how we should be discussing this and looking at the various parameters? Or should we just be saying these blanket statements like this, not giving any numbers and not talking about it in a way that is good enough? I mean, that's my critique of these guys. They're not talking about refute the greenhouse gas effect, refute that the CO2 numbers, bring up some actual data instead of these very loose statements. Increase in greening, we can't, there's too many parameters. It's just not good enough. Like, attack the arguments. And I think that's what they avoid. They avoid when speaking. They avoid talking about the actual science of this stuff. They avoid talking about how long CO2 exists in our atmosphere. They avoid talking about the process of CO2 being uptaken. That's what they avoid, and how those processes are going to change with climate change. They don't want to talk about that because they don't have the confidence to speak about that, guys, potentially. And that's my argument that I'm putting forward. So just want to point you guys towards a little bit of science on this. I already talked about Milankovitch cycles for the Ice Age stuff. As well, just want to, I was going to pull a video for you guys, but I think you guys can find a plenty good video. Just pull up YouTube, go to Google, look up the carbon dioxide life cycle in our atmosphere, look up Henry's law, look up, ocean acidification, look up all these scary things. Look up what the scientists are saying, and you don't have to necessarily believe in all this stuff, guys. You absorb the information and make your own opinion. So I just want to close this up on the history of environmental regulation in the U.S. because that's really kind of what the debate is for me and a lot of people in the U.S. here is, are we going to enact regulation to do anything about this? Or are we just going to kind of let things proceed in the free market? I think a lot of environmentalists would like to see some sort of regulation, either that being a carbon tax or something, anything, incentives to get renewable into the ground. I know I would, we would love to see that in my industry. Anything to try to help this issue, really. And there have been some incentives for some renewables in the past, so I don't want to say that that hasn't existed, but expand on all of those programs, go harder with everything. We need to increase in nuclear energy, all of these things more than likely. So, just to wrap this up, let's just talk about the history of environmental regulation in the US. Has it been effective? So, we could talk about the Clean Water Act for a lot of the start of this. Look into the history of that yourself. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but just think about the idea of clean water. Do we want it? Do we not want it? I think we want it. So, the Clean Water Act, it's had its problems in the past, and it's not a perfect law historically, but I think it's better than not having it, guys. Let's look at the water quality in our country versus countries that have no regulations surrounding it. I think we're doing the right thing with environmental regulation as far as that goes. And now let's talk about one that kind of more directly relates to, industry causing harm to the environment and then having to come in with regulation to deal with that. And we'll talk about the hole in the ozone layer that was starting to appear. That was directly caused by, I believe, chlorofluorocarbons. And regulation was enacted to deal with the hole in the ozone layer that these were causing. So go ahead and look up the history of that as well. And we now have ozone layer recovery after those regulations were enacted. So again, positive history of environmental regulation there. So it's not something that we can't do again. We can enact regulation to help out in this issue, and it's something that we should do if we want to deal with this issue, if we believe in climate change, if we want to address these problems. So thank you guys if you made it to the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope to discuss other topics of interest in the future on this channel. Not exactly sure what quite yet, but really it's just going to be anything that I'm personally interested in. So again, thank you guys for watching the video. And I hope you share it around. My biggest hope is that it would reach these guys and they talk about this issue in a way that truly addresses the science. Thanks a bunch.